everyone, and welcome to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we have a really important show planned for you tonight. We are going to be talking about the subject of child marriage, but not just from the statistics standpoint, not just from the standpoint of this is a problem that happens in the U.S. in most U.S. states and territories, but from the perspective of a survivor sharing her story. This is going to be an excellent show that you're going to want to tune in for yourself because you're going to learn how you can help make a difference. But you're also going to want to hit the share button right now so your friends can tune in and watch this important information as well. We're not only going to be talking about a survivor story, but steps to help change these laws in the U.S. and ways you can get involved to do that. So please go ahead and hit the share button, whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're watching on Facebook or Twitter. We want you to spread the word with us. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our amazing guests onto the show. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi, Ashley.
So this is Donna Poland and Casey Swegman, and I am so thankful that you all took the time to come on the show. Like, this is going to be just such an important discussion. Thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, Ashley. This is an incredibly critical topic for us to discuss, and it's an honor to be with you.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to go ahead and before we get into your story, Donna, I'm just going to go ahead and read some short bios from you, Donna, and you, Casey, just so people can kind of get like the feel of your bio and the work that you're doing. But of course, I'm going to want you to go into so much more detail because there's nothing better than hearing the story straight from your own mouths. So Donna Pollard is a child marriage survivor from Kentucky. She married at the age of just 16. She is now the founder of Survivors Corner, a nonprofit for adult trauma survivors, including those affected by child marriage in the U.S. Donna has partnered with Casey and other Tahirih, is that right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Tahirih Justice Center to combat the horrors of child marriage in the U.S. and to change antiquated laws that keep our youth unsafe. Casey Carter Swegman is a nationally recognized expert on the issues of forced and child marriage in the United States. The Tahirih Justice Center she oversees directs services to survivors across the country and provides technical assistance and training nationally and chairs the National Forced Marriage Working Group. She has also helped lead on the state and federal policy advocacy work, including Tahirih's campaign to end child marriage in the United States through state-based minimum age of marriage legislation, as well as drafting of core policies for national action to end forced marriage in the United States. Guys, you have done such incredible work, and I'm sorry I'm getting a little tongue twisted. My dyslexic sometimes gets the better of me, but reading your bios, like, you've done such fantastic work. I'm so glad to have you on the show tonight, and yeah, like, everybody listening, these are amazing women. Again, hit the share button because people are going to want to tune into this show. So I just want to start out with a couple of questions. Donna, would you go ahead and share with us some of your journey? Give us some insight to your experience and just help people understand this issue. It's not just a statistical thing, like, real people are involved, and we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. Well, I think it's important that people understand what really set me up to be vulnerable to be married off as a minor. And, when you look at my maternal lineage, as far back as I can trace, going back to the year 1814, every generation of my maternal lineage was a child marriage survivor, including my mother, who was 13 years old when she was married. And she had an 8th grade education. So, of course, that kept her in a cycle of poverty. She had what I realize now were, some pretty severe mental illnesses that ended up, because they were untreated, resulted in her abusing me physically and emotionally and psychologically when I was growing up. And then couple that with the fact that my father was hardly ever home. You know, he was a long distance truck driver after he retired from the Army. And so I didn't really have a close, stable relationship with either of my parents. And then when I was 12, my father was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer. And at that point, given 6 months to live, which he ended up surviving 8. But during that time, I had to take care of him. You know, hospice came in the home, and I would have to do things as a 12 and 13-year-old that no child should have to go through, like change his Depends and mash up foods, feed it to him. And so when he died, not only was I devastated by his death, but also the fact that I'd already been abused severely as a child. And I had to take care of my father on top of being at that critical age of adolescence. And so I ended up just cracking under the pressure of it all. And I started acting out in self-destructive ways that, you know, truthfully, as the mother of a 13-year-old now, I realize really weren't that bad had my mother had the coping skills to be able to deal with my behavior and seek help for me. But because she didn't, it resulted in me being admitted to a behavioral health facility for treatment when I was 14. And, you know, I wish I could say, oh, that's where my story stops, and that I received the help that I needed. But unfortunately, that's really where this began. There was a mental health technician that worked there. He was 29 years old. Again, I was 14. And he started grooming me in the facility. And of course, as a 14-year-old who had just lost her father, you know, I felt so flattered by the attention. And but totally fell prey to, you know, him grooming me and making it seem like, oh, because I was so mature, you know, this was a normal relationship. And when I was released from the facility, my mother let me have a dating relationship with him. I moved down to London, Kentucky at the time, which is in the south central part of Kentucky. He lived in southern Indiana. And my mother would go so far as to drive me all the way up to Elizabethtown, Kentucky, which is more northern, to meet him halfway so that, you know, she could leave me alone with him for hours at a time, and sometimes even in a hotel room. And well, she would go off and do whatever she did. And this went on for a couple of years until shortly after I turned 16, she consented to me marrying him. Now, he thought that because the state of Tennessee, which was not far from where I lived in London, you know, Pigeon Forge is well known for their shotgun weddings. And I mean, I think you can even go through a drive-through to get a marriage license. So he picked that as the spot for our wedding because he thought that it wouldn't really raise any questions because of, you know, how tasty it is. And so when we went down there, the clerk didn't even look up from the computer screen when she asked which one is the minor. I mean, it was so cold and transactional. And that was the first time that I really began to realize, oh, something's not right about this. I felt so dehumanized. But, you know, as a 16-year-old and someone who put all of my value in his opinion of me and his love for me, you know, I really did not feel that I was empowered to advocate for myself and to say this isn't something I want to follow through with. So we were married. And I ended up moving up to Indiana to live with him the next day. Because of it, I was considered a dropout of the 10th grade. And I lost a very substantial scholarship that I had been awarded for writing achievement because of it. And you know, it didn't take very long at all before the situation became really abusive. And I tried to leave multiple times. You know, I wasn't able to go to high school, even though, you know, I was a married minor, and you would think that meant emancipated, because the assistant principal said that it would only be a matter of time before I would become pregnant, and they didn't want me for school. And then, you know, the other part is working for minimum wage at a grocery store while he would stay home and get high or drunk and, you know, again, really abusive. And when I tried to leave, here I was, paycheck stub in hand, 2 different apartment complexes turned me away
Wow.
because I was not yet 18.
Ugh.
Yes. And I even tried to go to a domestic violence shelter. And the lady turned me away because I was not yet 18. And I remember arguing with her and saying, but I'm married, doesn't that mean that I have rights? And I didn't.
Wow.
And, I don't think that people realize how devastating and entrapped women can be in these situations. And that kept me in a situation where not only could I not access my own education, I had no ability to escape, but I also became pregnant at 16
Mm.
and had a miscarriage and could
Mm.
not advocate for my own health care, and ended up in a state where I could have died when the miscarriage happened
Wow.
because
Wow.
it kept delaying taking me to the hospital. Yes. And, then I got pregnant, and it was a successful pregnancy when I was 17, and I had my oldest daughter shortly after I turned 18. But that's another part of the issue, is that, because here I was so young and making such a small amount of money, high school
Mm.
dropout. When I was finally able to leave my perpetrator, the judge awarded him custody of my child.
Ugh.
And yes, and ordered me to pay him child support,
Ugh.
despite the fact that here he was in his 30s and was a college graduate. And here I was, at the time the divorce was finalized, a 20-year-old making $8 an hour. I mean, it was just a really devastating position all around. And ultimately, my oldest daughter is really the ultimate victim of the situation. But, I did go on to start building up my life and seeking out educational and employment opportunities that I began advancing through. And then back in 2016, I realized that, so much of my life had been impacted, even though I had put so much distance between myself and all that trauma.
Yeah.
I was still carrying so much of it with me. And that's when I really began realizing I had to find some way to reframe that into
Mm.
purpose.
Mm.
That's when I started doing research, and I found the Tahirih Justice Center, and I met with Casey and others there that, really helped put me on the path to, bring change to people that so desperately need it.
Mm. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that very vulnerable story. And it's truly heartbreaking what you had to suffer through, what your daughter had to suffer through. And not at all excusing any of the abuse from your mom, but even the trauma that was generational. That's just so much pain. And the courage and bravery that you have to, move forward through your life and now be doing advocacy work to help other people. Like it's truly inspiring. And hearing your story, like there are so many things that are just devastating. Not only when you were getting the marriage license, did the person not even look up? They didn't care enough to look up. When you went to a domestic violence prevention center, when you went to get an apartment, you didn't have any options. And I think that is the situation that so many women or girls rather in child marriages that they're experiencing. And thank you so much for sharing that. I'm so sorry you went through it. But I would love to ask a little bit about how you came upon Tahirih Justice Center, and talk to me about your advocacy work, what you're doing, how you're partnering with Tahirih, and yeah, I understand that you've worked across multiple states to work on updating laws about child marriage. Talk to us about that as well.
Sure, thank you. And so back in 2016, it was another really low point in my life. I was divorced for a second time after I got out of the
Mm.
first. situation. I had remarried, and that man was not a bad guy at all. He's the father of my youngest daughter. But, it just wasn't a compatible situation. And so I felt like everything was falling apart, and I was really faced with having to look at my history and no longer be ashamed of it, and really start recognizing how that was showing up in my life and impacting my relationships,
Yeah.
whether it was my relationships with others or my relationship with myself. And through that healing journey, I started doing research to try to connect with others that, were doing this type of work that would end child marriage, because I realized that was the core of all of this,
Right.
and the
Right.
fact that legally I could be exploited and abused and not have the ability to advocate for myself was a huge eye opener. And so I thought, again, with the mantra of reframing trauma into purpose, what can be my purpose of this? And so I remember going to the library thinking, oh, I was going to, find some magical book that was going to tell me all the data from the state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And I was going to, go forth and change the laws. And of course, I didn't find any of that data at the library. But what I did find, just by doing an online search, was the Tahirih Justice Center. And responded to a call out that they had on their website for stories from child marriage survivors. And yeah, so I wrote out my story for the first time, which was so cathartic.
Yes.
And I sent that in. And I didn't really expect that I was going to hear from anybody. I just thought, well, maybe this can be useful, in the initiative that they're doing. But within just a couple of weeks, I had a call from one of the ladies that works there, and we chatted for over an hour. And I realized, oh my goodness, talk about, a dream fulfilled, a path of partnering with an organization that has such a phenomenal reputation, that's really survivor-centered in their work. So I joined forces with them, and them providing me a voice to be able to, reach others, really helped me to form a community and become part of a community of survivors that are all actively looking to share their stories in a way that's going to help others realize that they're not alone, and they can absolutely repurpose that pain and do something that's going to change the world.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love the redemptiveness of your story, and of course, it does not excuse or make right any of the things that happened to you, but just the way that you've been able to reframe it, like you said, and now make this work that you're doing empowering for yourself, regaining your voice, and then giving other people a voice. Like that's so powerful. And what you said about other people being able to, or about sharing your story and how empowering that is, like I can say that for sure when I've talked about different abusive experiences that I've gone through. Just getting a voice for myself really helped on the healing path. And anybody who's listening, whether you tell just one safe person next to you or whether you just write your story out, just the simple act of doing that can be so cathartic, so healing. And so thank you for bringing up that. I'd love to just kind of ask you about what are some of the common misconceptions about child marriage in the U.S.? I think I learned about this a couple years ago, but I know consistently when I've talked about it online, there are people who are like, "What? Child marriage is legal in the U.S.? Isn't that somewhere overseas?" But in fact, I went to Uganda last year with a women's empowerment conference and worked with the She Learns organization, and child marriage is banned there. 18 no exceptions, and it's not in the US, and just so interesting. So because there's a lot of misconceptions about that, can you speak to child marriage misconceptions, what you hear the most, and just kind of enlighten people?
Oh, absolutely. So, and I'll go here with the state of Kentucky as an example. Normally when whenever I talk about child marriage happening in either this state or anywhere in the country, I'll open by saying, if I were to tell you that 10,000 cases of child marriage occurred since the year of 2000 in one demographic area alone, with the youngest child being 13, pregnant, married off to a 33-year-old man, where would you think that happened? And the normal response that I get is Afghanistan. No, that was Kentucky. And so, this misconception that child marriage is a problem that's happening elsewhere, it's happening in a developing country, perhaps. That's just not true, especially when we look at a nationwide level and we realize that just in the last 20 years, which is a very recent period of time, we've had 250,000 child marriages that have occurred. And, these children have been in situations very similar to my own.
Yeah.
And, another misconception is that people think, well, it's only 16 and 16-year-olds that are married, or, maybe two 17-year-olds, or, a boy is shipping off to war or what have you. But that makes up such a small percentage. Here in the state of Kentucky, it was well over 85%, where it was a minor married to an adult. Yes. We saw some horrible age discrepancies before we changed the law here. That 13-year-old girl that I mentioned, there was a 15-year-old that was married off to a 52-year-old man. There was a 17-year-old married to a 72-year-old man. I mean, looking at my example, when I was 16 and the perpetrator that I married was nearly 31. I mean, it's just egregious examples.
Wow. Well, I hope everybody listening to this is really taking in that information. And again, go ahead and hit the share button if you haven't on this show, because people need to hear this information. Because Donna, you are just so right. It's not just a problem in other places. It's a problem in other places, but it's a problem here in the U.S. Your story speaks to that, and so do hundreds of thousands of other people's stories. And we need to wake up and realize it's happening here. And Casey, I would love to bring you into the conversation right now. I know you've been sitting quietly for a bit. I appreciate you being here today. But I wanted to ask you, because you specifically work with the Tahirih Justice Center, you're working on some things around North Carolina, and I'd like to know what the problem looks like here. I'm in North Carolina right now, and that's where I live. I know this is a problem. Talk to us about the issue here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you, Ashley, for having us on to talk about this on your show. It's really been an honor to get to know you better and to be on tonight with Donna. And, as Donna shared, we've been working together for many years, but it is truly always a privilege to be side by side with you. And every single time I hear your story, I learn something new, and I always get choked up. I can't help it. And you're just such a powerful, authentic storyteller, and I'm just so appreciative of you every time. So to get to where are we in North Carolina, it is actually a pretty interesting story. So we are finding ourselves right now in a really profound moment, because up until just a few weeks ago, we didn't know the extent of the child marriage problem in North Carolina. It was one of 8 states where data could not be uncovered by frontline reporters, by Tahirih, by other organizations trying to dig into this nationwide. And since that frontline report in 2017, 25 states, including Kentucky, including Tennessee, Indiana, and Texas, and many others, have made progress to end or limit child marriage in recent years. And up until about 3 weeks ago, North Carolina didn't even know what their problem was.
Wow.
But we are very, very lucky that about a year ago, a man by the name of Drew Ressinger, who's a register of deeds in Buncombe County, was unfortunately faced with a dilemma. He had a 49-year-old man walk into his office with a 17-year-old girl, and they wanted a marriage license. And he just did not feel right about it. And so he denied that marriage license against the law of North Carolina.
Wow.
He went with his gut, and he did not approve that marriage license, but it got him thinking, you know, this wasn't the first time he had something like that just didn't feel right, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. And so he wanted to look at his data. He's the Register of Deeds. He has access to it.
Yeah.
And what he found was upsetting. And so he went colleague to colleague, and he got 49 other counties, 50 counties total, to report their marriage license data in North Carolina. And he partnered with this incredible international organization who has an amazing staff member there in North Carolina. Her name is Lyric Thompson. She's with the International Center for Research on Women. They got involved, and with his help, they uncovered that marriage license application data from 50 of North Carolina's 100 counties. And like I said, those statistics were really unsettling, to say the very least, projecting out to assume similar rates of marriage license applications in other counties and comparing North Carolina to other states with already known data sets. The analysis found that North Carolina may rank among the country's top 5 states with the highest rates of child marriage, with 8,781. So that's almost 9,000 minors listed in marriage license applications in North Carolina. And that was not 20, 30 years ago. That was from the year 2000 to 2015.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. That's a lot.
And it is. And the, same exact patterns that Donna has mentioned before. Unfortunately, North Carolina is not exceptional in this regard. The overwhelming majority of those marriage license applications were occurring between a minor and an adult, not two minors marrying each other. And an alarming number of marriage license applications legally sanctioned a marriage between two people whose ages and age differences meant that any sex that occurred outside of marriage would have already been classified as a Class B felony under your statutory rape laws. And so what we criminalize in one space, we are sanctioning in another. And we see that mismatch as entirely disturbing. And what we want to see is better protection for the girls of North Carolina. And, I want to reiterate that these statistics might be disturbing. These ages and age differences might be very upsetting, but under current North Carolina law, all of these marriages are legal. Girls as young as 14 are legally allowed to marry in the state of North Carolina. And that statutory age set by law is tied for the lowest in the country, only with Alaska. And so we have our work cut out for us here in North Carolina. But what I hope that your viewers hear now is that with survivors like Donna, with eager citizens of the state like Drew and like Lyric, we can make a difference in this state. We have the data we need now to make our point. We can no longer ignore the fact that this is happening in North Carolina. The data speaks for itself. And I think the question now is, what do we do about it?
Yes. Whew, that is heavy stuff. And I know from personal experience, I've done a lot of research and some work around child marriage. And I guess it was 2019. I went to one of our courthouses here, and I just went through their marriage records. And I just looked back as far as the last 5 years. And I looked through all those manually because they didn't have them like in the system where you could easily search them. I came away with a stack of papers just from that one county of people who had been married underage. And so it's a horrific thing that's happening. And it is happening, and it's happening in our very own counties. Like, this isn't just like some off weird county where there's some type of a cult going on. Like, this is happening all over. It's happening in small cities, it's happening in big cities, it's happening everywhere. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, just a few years ago, child marriage was legal in every single state in the US. That has changed. So can you tell us where we're at in the progress so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, we've got 4 states that since 2016 have completely outlawed child marriage altogether. Age 18, no exceptions. Right. And that's Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. And did I get that right, Donna?
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, it sounds right. I think Minnesota was.
Yes, sorry, it's Minnesota, not Wisconsin.
Not Wisconsin.
I do apologize to my Wisconsinites.
It's one of the states.
Yes. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. Delaware was the first, New Jersey was the second, and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania followed shortly after. And those are huge achievements.
Right.
And we really applaud those states for making that happen. In New Jersey, it took 2 full legislative sessions. In Pennsylvania, it took several years, but we're getting there. In the other states, and there are 25 total that have made progress on this issue so far, we have seen places like Kentucky and Texas and Virginia put in incredible safeguards to make it not possible for children to marry anymore. And so we are seeing great progress in this movement, and we would love to see North Carolina join in that progress, because that case that I mentioned, the 49-year-old and the 17-year-old that walked into Drew's office, they were from Tennessee, because Tennessee has actually gotten there first. Their law is not perfect, and we can do better. But that couple, that man, knew that Tennessee had strengthened their laws and knew that North Carolina had weaker laws, and came there intentionally. And so what we don't want to see, and what we want to put an end to before it gets worse, is Carolina becoming a destination regionally for child marriage.
Wow. So that's actually a thing then, people making states that have lax laws destinations for their behaviors. Wow. And I want to get into a question about what we can do to help, what some of the solutions are, because we want to make North Carolina state number 5, 18 no exceptions. But before we do that, there are just a couple things that came up for me as far as questions. So why is it that domestic violence prevention centers would turn away a minor? I think that's something people don't think about, but maybe expound on why that's the reason.
Sure. And I can start, and Donna, maybe I can also hand it over to you. You have personal experience with this, but I think that was one of the major things that sparked Tahirih's interest in writing our first report, which is called Falling Through the Cracks on this particular issue. Because as a service provider, what we saw time and time again is that states are not set up to meet the needs of minors who are married. And that's because in many, many states prior to this movement beginning, a married minor was not emancipated, but they were no longer considered part of Child Protective Services mandate. And so services set up for adults, shelters, attorneys, all of that, protection orders, where if you're a child, you need your parents' help to avail yourselves of those systems, right? The entire system assumes the benevolence of parents and the delinquency of minors. But once a minor is married, there is no system there as a safety net for them. Every system is throwing their hands up saying, not ours. We can't help. Our hands are tied. And that is where we really saw, we cannot continue down this road as a country. We cannot continue to believe we are exceptional while waggling our fingers at other countries and thinking that it only happens in places like Afghanistan, right? We have to do better here. And Donna, I don't know if you want to share more about why that continues to happen.
Sure. Well, I think in the majority of states, and certainly was my experience, agencies are prevented from being able to take on the responsibility for minors. And in my case in particular, I know that the lady told me she could not have me come there to the shelter because I would be considered a liability for them. And so as a child marriage survivor, you're not granted enumerated rights necessarily of an adult, and you do become a liability because you're in this legal gray area. As Casey mentioned, Child Protective Services cannot even be involved. And I also know that firsthand because with all the times that the police were called to the apartments that I lived in with my perpetrator, I was never really questioned. He was the adult. He was the one that would, basically gaslight me and say that I had issues. And as a mental health professional, he was helping me work through them. I mean, it was just so incredibly manipulative. But there was one day that Child Protective Services came with the police, and I can only assume that a neighbor is the one that had contacted them, knowing how young I was. And once they found out that I was married, they left before the police even did. because
Wow.
again, there's nothing that they could do, you know? So it's just an atrocious trap that minors end up finding themselves in.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And I want to speak to maybe one of the most common challenges to the child marriage discussion that I hear a lot of times, and that is people saying, like you mentioned before, that it's, you know, two children, you know, two minors getting married, that type of thing. But I guess what I have seen is people are assuming that minors are able to consent to an adult with a legal contract, because essentially that's what marriage is. I know there's religious beliefs around marriage, but marriage is a contract, and that minor wouldn't be able to sign any other contract. They wouldn't be able to vote, so they don't have the same legal rights as an adult. It's impossible for there to not be a power imbalance with that age difference when somebody is a minor. So, can we talk about consent for a minute and just, you know, why it's so important that two people are both legally adults, and why it's not really great for, in the very few cases where this happens, an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old? Why is it better for that 17-year-old to wait till they're 18? Can we talk about that consent piece there?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Casey, if you're okay with it, I'll kick it off and then turn it over to you if you have anything to add. But that word that you used, Ashley, power imbalance, that's exactly what it is. I mean, consider that if a minor was to go to a bank to open up a bank account, they have to have a legal adult sign for them to have a bank account. You know, lines of credit, that's only going to apply to a person that is a legal adult. I mean, there are so many just practical life, you know, things that we take for granted that
Yeah.
minors don't have access to. And so if they are not able to be sovereign and independent financially, just as one example,
Yeah.
that opens the door for them to be preyed upon. And then, you know, the other question becomes, in the case, especially with the very egregious age differences that we talked about earlier, not only does this child now, you know, have to be around this perpetrator consistently because they're married to them, and this predator has access to continue preying on their vulnerability and basically raping them,
Yeah.
but they also have access to the children that result from that. And then, you know, as in my situation, leaving, when a judge looks at a high school dropout that's so young, making $8 an hour, working
Yeah.
20 hours a week, that, you know, obviously is in a very traumatized state, well, that's not exactly ideal to raise a child. And
Right.
so where does the custody go? The custody goes to the person that can manipulate the system and
Yeah.
has manipulated the system and taken advantage of lax laws. And, you know, then that person ends up, the child ends up growing up in a horrifically abusive environment. So there's just so many complexities and
Yeah.
so many implications that come from
Mm.
those power imbalances.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Casey, do you have
Yeah,
anything to add there?
absolutely. I think this is, you know, we could talk about the definition of consent for days,
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you what lies behind every single one of these statistics from North Carolina. I guarantee you there are one or two happily married couples where it was fully consensual. But what we know is from experience, working on cases and having survivor after survivor come forward, is that the majority of these marriages involve coercion, involve manipulation, and involve exploitation, not only from the spouse, but from the parents. And that's where we see a misuse and abuse of the parental consent waiver and the exception. A lot of times you have to be 18 to get married, but if you have parental consent or pregnancy, there we're doubling down on not one, but two opportunities for exploitation and abuse
Yeah.
to be your ticket to force a young person into a marriage. They may or may not fully understand what that is, what their obligations are going to be, how difficult it is to leave.
Mm.
And so sometimes we have survivors come forward and say, you know, what do you mean it was forced? What do you mean it was coerced? Was somebody holding a gun to your head when you got married? And that is such an archaic way of thinking about
Coercion
consent.
is so much bigger.
Yes, and there is so much nefarious pressure from society, from parents, from predatory adults who know the system, who know the world, who know your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And that is what we see lying behind many of these marriages where a minor is marrying an adult. And they reflect back many years later and they see all of the ways in which that was not consensual, but it was so hard to name in the moment what was going on.
Right.
And we also see this narrative of, well, in many states, the only way to leave your parents' home is to get married and to live with somebody else, live with a spouse. And a lot of advocates have said to us, well, that's their door to safety. And that is a false narrative. That is a trap door. That is a frying pan to fire situation, because the person they are marrying is most likely preying upon the known vulnerability of a child who has an abusive home. And so more often than not, that is just an avenue to abuse by a different adult. And so the solution to abuse in the home from parents is not marrying. It is solving that problem of abuse in that home.
Yes.
Marriage should be for two legal adults who have the same legal capabilities to assert their rights and to seek safety. And that is really, you know, for me, full stop, what we are talking about here.
Yeah. Wow. So, Casey, how can we make that happen? Like, what are the solutions to this problem? And like, our listeners, I see all these comments coming up. Like, people are deep into this conversation. And again, I just want to make a call out. If you're listening, go ahead and hit share. People need to hear this. What can we do to make a change? What is the next step?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, it's a very simple solution, and we have a lot of enthusiasm for it already in North Carolina. We want to see an end to child marriage, plain and simple. Research shows that whatever the circumstances, results of child marriage are compoundingly negative. And so what we want to see is set the age at 18, no exceptions. It's the best solution to protect the children of North Carolina and increasingly the children from neighboring states from abuse and exploitation. And it is, quite frankly, also the most straightforward. It is very easy to write that law.
Yeah.
It is one sentence. And it is the most cost effective for people who want to bring that into the equation. And so we see that as our ultimate goal here in North Carolina.
That's great.
Absolutely. And if I could add to, you know, as a survivor and as somebody who has gone on to start a nonprofit organization specifically for survivors, it's so critical that we have survivors' voices in this effort, because that is really what drives the ultimate change. And, you know, I'll be very candid. I've done some work with other organizations that, you know, it's really been more re-traumatizing than it has felt empowering. But of course, with the Tahirih Justice Center, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
And then with Survivors Corner, we actually help survivors to find a way to share their experience in a way that's going to feel empowering, and also how to carve a lifetime of experience into a 3-minute testimony.
Wow.
You know, because that's something that's really challenging to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll acknowledge as well that from an emotional standpoint, when you've experienced such trauma, a lot of times as a survivor, you carry so much shame and guilt with you.
Yeah.
And I want to say to your listeners, Ashley, that as a survivor, the shame is not yours to carry. Your perpetrator's crimes against you are not your shame to carry. And it's absolutely possible to align yourself with others who have been in this fight, who are going to support you in this process and help you to share your experience in such a way that helps you deepen your own healing and also changes the life for so many children in the state of North Carolina.
Wow.
Yes. Thank you, Donna.
So you all looking for stories then, yeah?
We are. I was going to just tack on to what Donna just shared to say, we haven't always had a Donna in every state where we work. It is so critical to have voices that are local, to be able to speak to say, this didn't just happen to Donna in Kentucky. This didn't just happen to someone in Virginia. This is happening here in North Carolina. And I know that because it happened to me. And I can speak till I'm blue in the face about the statistics, about the patterns, about my cases. People can ignore me. I've had legislators pick up their cell phone while I'm talking. What they cannot ignore and what they cannot disrespect is the lived experience of one of their own constituents. And so what we are hoping for today is that listening to Donna's story, listening to her journey, knowing that there is support for folks who want to step forward and share their story. You will not be out on a limb. You will not be on your own. You will have a supportive circle of people around you. But to make this change in North Carolina, we really need local survivors to lend their voices to this movement. And we are really hopeful that this talk today will inspire people to come forward.
Wow. And where can they come forward to?
I think I'm going to actually hand that to Donna, because the Tahirih Justice Center is very much focused on legislative advocacy and direct services. But for someone who is in a place like Donna, who is not in need of my services, but they're ready to tell their story, but maybe don't know where to begin, that's the bread and butter of Survivor's Corner. So I think, Donna, you would be the best person for folks to be in touch with.
Absolutely. So folks can go to our website, which is survivorscorner.org. There's a contact us button there, so you can certainly submit a request in, and we would love to hear from you and schedule some time to talk with you. Or you can also email us at resilientcommunity@survivorscorner.org. And then, of course, we're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is yourvoice_SC. Our Instagram is Survivors Corner 502. And our Facebook is survivorscorner.lou.
Excellent.
Nice.
Excellent. So we'll be sure to put that in the comments here. And one question before we go to a break, Donna, I'd like to ask you, since you've shared your story, what are some of the changes that have happened in your life? How has that shifted for you?
Oh my goodness, my life has done a complete 180 since I began sharing. As I mentioned, I started a nonprofit organization to be able to help other survivors along their healing journey and really advocate for change. And I really think that so much of my own healing and my own empowerment has come from being within a community of survivors where we're able to process our experiences with each other and really focus on how we can align and support each other's mission to be able to advance social justice reform in a variety of ways, including child marriage.
Wow. Wow. Well, everybody, sharing your story can be one of the most empowering things. And if you want to help with these laws in North Carolina, if you've got a story around child marriage that you've experienced, please go to survivorscorner.org and reach out. And I mean, Donna's an amazing person and just such a warm person to speak with. And I love the way that you are sensitive and how you care for people. This isn't something where you're just trying to use people. You're trying to empower people and then empower them to help others. That's so powerful. And we're going to continue this interview in just a minute, but I actually have a short announcement for everybody on the show. Something really exciting is coming up in October. Hi, I'm Ashley Easter, and I am the founder and executive director of Courage 365. And boy, do we have something exciting planned for you. For the whole month of October, we have an amazing free survivor and advocate event, all based online just for you. We are calling it the 30 Days of Courage Challenge. And let me tell you, this is gonna be epic. We have amazing speakers that are gonna be scattered throughout the 30 days, including Leah Remini, cult survivor from Scientology. We have Jonathan Sheck, who is a survivor and Hollywood actor. We have Sarah Ann Mass, who is a survivor of Harvey Weinstein and one of the leaders of the Me Too movement. We also have Jimmy Hinton, who is an expert on predator deception. We have Levon Proverbs, who is a survivor and healer. We have Ebony Withers, who is an amazing survivor and also an advocate for women. We are also not only going to be having these amazing, incredible speakers, we're going to be listening to them talk, doing live Q&As with them. We are also going to be having support groups throughout the month. We're going to have daily inspirational videos and conversation starters. We're going to have weekly challenges that have healing and empowerment exercises just for you, along with some pretty cool prizes. I'm inviting you to join the 30 Days of Courage Challenge with us starting October 1st through 30th. Again, it's totally and completely free. This is for survivors, advocates, and those who support survivors. All you have to do is get inside the Courage 365 Facebook group. Hey everybody, and we are back with the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we are speaking with Donna and Casey today. Donna has just shared her very vulnerable story of experiencing child marriage, and Casey has been talking about the Tahirih Justice Center and the work that she and Donna are doing together to end child marriage in North Carolina. I just want to thank you both so much for speaking with us today. I mean, this has been so enlightening, and you've given us empowering steps moving forward. And I want people to know how they can get in touch with you. But before we do that, this is a question I ask everybody on the show, and I'd like to ask both of you this. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received? Something that's really changed your life? Maybe it's a motto, maybe it's a rule you live by, but I'd love to hear from both of you what that is.
I'm going to let Donna go first, unless you would like to cede that to me.
No, that's fine. I don't mind. So I think that one of the most profound rules that I've begun to live by, especially having entered this advocacy journey, has been to know that it is absolutely okay for my passion for change to be stronger than another person's resignation to defeat. And that has come from, going toe to toe with people who haven't necessarily agreed with me on some of the reform initiatives, or who have really challenged me to think differently about my approach. And, through that community that I mentioned earlier in the interview and connecting with other survivors, it's not uncommon for us to experience silencing and to experience the, perpetuation of carrying shame. But when we realize that we have so much power to bring to the discussions, and if we allow that commitment to change to be bigger than another person's resignation to defeat, we can move mountains, as you've seen that we've done in a variety of different states by partnering.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. Casey, you got something for us too?
I do, and I think this might be familiar to Donna. I'm sure she's probably heard it from the person who said it to me, but this was advice given to me by our colleague, Jeannie Smoot, she is truly the backbone of much of this work. She is a mentor of mine. I know a dear friend of Donna's. And, I've always been nervous about what my role is in this movement. I'm not an attorney, not a policy advocate by trade. So I've never really known exactly where I fit, but Jeannie said, you are exactly what is needed in this moment. And I really, really liked that, because it was just a reassurance that to be successful, I don't need to be her. I don't need to be somebody else. Nobody can be Jeannie Smoot. If you know her, there's just absolutely no way. But that you can really do it just by being your full authentic self, because people respond to authenticity. I think that's why people respond to Donna so well. They respond to sincerity and empathy and to honesty. And so don't try to be anybody, because the world doesn't need anybody else. They need you just as you are. And so I think I've seen that play out very powerfully just in this conversation, and with all of the survivors like Donna who have come forward. It's been a really incredible journey to be on, and just to embrace the skills that we have and bring them all to the table, and they have been enough, and we have made a lot of change.
That's amazing. Thank you both for that. And before we end the interview, I would just like you both to share your organization's information again, website, social media, and maybe end with where people can share their story. So maybe, Casey, if you want to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be a bit of a list, so I'm sure we can post it up on Facebook and all of your sites later, Ashley.
Yes.
But to begin with, I would say a great starting place is tahirih.org/child marriage. That is a one-stop shop for all of the information you need about where the campaign stands, what is the law in your state, to understand North Carolina better. Got lots of material there. There's also a button to click to email us if you are interested in telling your story. The email address itself to get in touch is FMI, which stands for Forced Marriage Initiative, at tahirih.org. And I also want to shout out our second site, which is specifically for individuals at risk, individuals in crisis who need assistance now, case management, emotional support, referrals to shelter, whatever the case may be, an attorney. And that website is preventforcedmarriage.org. It has our contact information, including phone number, email, and a confidential anonymous online portal where you can send a request for help through the website that does not trace back to an email address. And you can give us instructions on how to safely contact you through that website portal. So 2 websites and an email address. And I look forward to hearing from any listener who might be so inspired. And I hope that anyone who thinks they might know someone who might need services to please share the preventforcedmarriage.org website.
Yes, yes. Donna?
Yeah, so our website once again is survivorscorner.org. You can email us at resilientcommunity@survivorscorner.org. Our Facebook page is survivorscorner.lou. Instagram is Survivors Corner 502, and our Twitter handle is yourvoice_SC. And if you are a survivor or know a survivor that wants to get in contact with us to share your story, the best way to contact us would be through email. And again, we would be happy to set up a Zoom meeting with you or meet with you over a phone call, or even just correspond through email or text if you prefer that way as well. We're here to support you in whatever way that feels right for you on this journey.
Thank you both so much for being on the show tonight and for the amazing, courageous work that you are doing. This has truly been an honor. Thank you both.
Thank you
so much, Ashley.
And everybody, I want to encourage you to also follow Courage 365 on our social media accounts. And I want to give a special shout out to what you saw in the commercial break. That is our 30 Days of Courage Challenge. All you have to do to get in on that, again, it's totally and completely free, is just go to our Courage 365 Facebook page. And there'll be information there, but you're actually going to go into the Courage 365 Facebook group. So if you aren't able to find that by searching, just go to the Courage 365 Facebook page and you'll find the link there. But that's where it's all going to be hosted, inside the Facebook group. We want you there. These are some powerful speakers, and we're going to have some amazing conversations and discussions. If you have been to some of these stale online conferences that people have had during COVID, I'm telling you, I'm a little burned out on that. This is going to be different. Not only do we have epic speakers, but we've got so many different engagement points. So you're actually involved in a community, not just sitting there listening to a lecture. So please go ahead and join the 30 Days of Courage Challenge by getting into the Courage 365 Facebook group. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. And as always, live with courage.